For any musician, it's very important for you to be able to practice with the metronome. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 tips that has helped me and my students to become better violinists and better musicians by using a metronome. And there are a variety of different practice apps and metronome apps. The one I'm going to be using today is called Soundblender The Metronome, and it's free on iOS and Android. Or if you don't have an app for the metronome and you don't have money to buy a metronome, you can just go on Google, type in metronome, and literally it's right there. Metronome practice is key in every single musician's practice routine. And for me, the goal of a metronome is to use as a practice tool and as a reference for something that I'm learning or something that I'm kind of reviewing. And we're going to dive right into those steps right now. The first key tip that I like to address when practicing with the metronome is that you want to be as in sync with the metronome as possible. Before I explain, I want to tell you a quick story as to why you need to be in sync with your metronome. I was doing a recording session a little while ago, actually not a little while ago, a few years ago actually, and this is something that I observed when I was doing this recording session, because when you do recording sessions in like an orchestral setting or in like some kind of small ensemble setting, you have like a headset, and normally if you're using Ableton or if you're using Pro Tools or Logic, then you have a headset and you have a little tick a metronome in your left or right ear. I prefer my right ear. And something that I've noticed in the successful recording sessions is when I don't actually hear the metronome while I'm playing, because I am so in sync with my surroundings, with the ensemble, with the conductor, that it kind of becomes engraved in my body. And that's the point I want to make with practicing with the metronome, but I'm going to get to that in the end of the video. Tip number 2 to practicing with the metronome is to practice slowly and then work your way upwards. I can't tell you how many times my students love to practice pieces fast, but as the famous Itzhak Perlman says, if you practice slow, you forget slow. And I find this to be super true in my life, because every time I've practiced the metronome slowly and worked my way up, it may have taken me slightly longer, but in my experience, I've actually remembered the piece for longer because I've actually taken the time to actually master the piece, the ins and outs, the intonation, the bowing, the difference between the whole steps and the half steps. I really took advantage of the slow practice, because as a colleague of mine once said, if you play slow, you actually get to hear more, because if you practice fast, you're not going to be able to hear the small details and your mistakes. Of course, when we practice, we want to sound amazing in the practice room, but I warn you that if you do that, it's detrimental to your playing, detrimental to your practice, and eventually you're going to slowly spiral downwards in your violin development. Tip number 3 is to practice in small beats. And I'm going to explain this in just a moment when I play Vivaldi's A minor concerto, first movement, of course. And practicing in smaller beats will eventually help you get to a higher level if you're wanting to be a professional violinist, or if you want to continue building your brand. That's how you get to the next level, folks. That's how you get to the professional status. And in order to do that, in order to monetize and brand yourself, I want to actually thank today's sponsor, Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle is a great platform for anyone who is wanting to build their brand, optimize their brand for search engine optimization. Bandzoogle is built for musicians so that you can really help monetize your image, your music, your brand. So I want to give you a gift of 15% off your first annual subscription on Bandzoogle, and you can use my promo code EricViolin for more information. I'm going to leave a link down in the description below. So everybody knows the famous Vivaldi A minor violin concerto, so on and so on. But we're actually going to work on the 8th note beats. So what do I mean by that? So let me give you an example. I have my metronome here on my phone, and you hear the metronome here. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to play the 8th note click. So I'm going to play. And if you listen closely, I'm just playing to the 8th note click. Let me turn that off for a quick second. So just based on that alone, you can tell that I'm going right on the 8th note, and I'm really, really in sync with the metronome, which goes back to the point number 1, is to be in sync with the metronome. I'm going to try one more time, see if you can really hear the distinction. So I'm going to play again. have students come into my lesson and they hate the metronome, and they actually argue to me, it's like, I can't hear the metronome because my violin's too loud. Well, actually, if you don't hear your metronome while you're playing with the metronome, that's actually a good thing. I mean, if you have it at a reasonable level, of course, because you want to hear it just a little bit for you to make sure you're on track with the metronome. However, you don't want to be hearing the metronome maybe like ahead of the beat or, before the beat. That's something that we don't want in our practice. Let's go to tip number 4. And tip number 4 is to practice a little bit faster with larger beats. So the way I would do this is, of course, I would maybe speed up the tempo slightly if I feel like I'm going in the right direction, and I'm gonna go with the quarter note beats. So right now, BPM is at 80, which actually I can just leave at 80. That's another trick that you can do. And I'm gonna go based on the quarter note. Here we go. Etc., etc., of course. And that is something that you will eventually strive towards. That's why I have you guys start with the smaller beats first and a slower tempo, because you can use, for example, 80 beats per minute interchangeably with the 8th note click and the quarter note click. And if you want to even go a step further, I would, just to get like a bigger sense, like a bigger feel of the piece, I'm actually going to put my metronome down like a lot lower to maybe 45. And you can hear how slow it is. And I'm gonna do it by the half notes. So this is gonna be 2 beats per measure. So here we go. So of course that's like on the most extreme side, but you wanna make sure you line up exactly with that metronome. Because you made it to this point of the video, I'm actually going to leave a bonus tip towards the end, so keep watching until the end. Tip number 5 is to be efficient with your metronome practice. If you're learning a new piece, I would go based on the steps that I've just given you. However, let's say you already know a piece. What if you are just like brushing up Vivaldi A minor concerto? Then the practice is slightly different. You don't have to go based on the steps that I've just laid out for you, because you internally know the music and you know the fingerings, you know the bowings. And at that point, you only work on things that are not helping you or you're struggling with. I would keep those steps in mind, of course, have a smaller BPM, go faster. And I would not go like every 10. Like if you're starting at 60, then I wouldn't like mess around with going to 70, 80, 90, 100. I would like start at 60. And if you feel like you've accomplished, a specific section for, 4 times in a row, everything is like looking solid, you have perfected those 4 times, then I would maybe go up to 25 beats per minute or even 30 beats per minute to see how I am doing with the tempo. Because the goal is to play without a metronome, but the metronome really helps you internalize the beat. That's the whole point of the metronome, folks. So that way you're not playing with the metronome on stage. You're playing with the metronome so that you build an internal clock, machine, metronome inside your body and inside your muscles and your brain. So you really get to learn how to feel what is 80 beats per minute, what is 60, what is 120. Now for the bonus tip. This may not come as a shock to many of you, but never assume that you're right. I can't tell you how many times I kind of like shock myself. I'm like, oh, I'm actually quite faster than I thought, or I'm slower than I thought. So never assume that you're right, because for me as a professional violinist, and for anyone who's a professional, they use a metronome as a reference, but they always double check, if they're going ahead or if they're going behind. Jascha Heifetz, one of the great American violinists of the 20th century, is known for being such a stickler with his tempi. And having a strict tempo, having a strict metronome clock inside you goes a long way, because it makes the whole process more enjoyable. It makes the process more enjoyable because you're playing at such a high level. And that's what I want for you folks, is to play at your best to help become a better violinist for years to come. Also, if you're looking for more violin practice tips, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, so that way you get notified for when these kinds of videos come out. And I'm gonna leave playlists right over here and videos right over here for you to take a look at for the next video.